There is a moment in a man's life when the noise of the world begins to fade, not because his hearing is failing, but because his listening is changing. He doesn't decide to pull away. It happens as naturally as a leaf detaching from a tree in autumn. There is no resentment in this separation, no grand declaration of independence. It is a quiet inward turning. The crowd continues its dance, but he has gradually, almost imperceptibly, stopped moving to its rhythm. He still stands among them, but he is no longer of them. The chatter that once animated him, the gossip, the status updates, the recycled complaints, now sounds like a language he once knew but has somehow forgotten. It isn't that the words have no meaning. It's that their meaning has been exhausted. He has seen behind the curtain and noticed the machinery of social interaction, the desperate need to be liked, the unspoken agreement to belong, the careful curation of the right thing to say. And seeing it, he can no longer unsee it. So he steps back, not with a slam of the door, but with a gentle closing. People still greet him. They still offer the familiar scripts of small talk. But the connection, the electrical current that once seemed to flow between them, has vanished. The curious thing is, he realizes now that the current was never really there. It was a mutual hallucination, a shared performance where both parties agreed to feel connected. He isn't burning bridges. He is simply no longer paying the toll to cross them. He stops pretending, and in that cessation, a natural distance unfolds. This is not loneliness. This is solitude. It is the vital, breathing space between the person he was taught to be and the person he is discovering himself to be. In this new quiet, his vision clears. He begins to see the invisible architecture of most human bonds, and he understands it is not built from the deep, unshakable materials of truth and vulnerability. It is held together by the flimsier stuff of habit, comfort, and shared illusion. He watches people bond over their mutual disdain for their jobs, their collective pursuit of a higher rung on the ladder, their fierce defense of ideas they inherited but never truly examined. He remembers doing the same. He remembers mistaking the energetic exchange of validation for genuine intimacy. Now, it just feels like noise. He notices how much talking is merely a defense against silence, a frantic effort to fill the empty space with something, anything, to prove we are here. He sees the immense energy people expend keeping up appearances, the constant, quiet hunger for the next hit of reassurance, the next nod of agreement, the next piece of evidence that they are acceptable. And because he no longer feels that hunger himself, its presence in others becomes unmistakable. He sees how many relationships are sustained not by a foundation of raw honesty, but by a silent, mutual pact to keep the story going, to never question the narrative, to protect the shared dream at all costs. He understands why this is. The familiar, even when it is a cage, feels safer than the unknown. So he does not judge. He still cares. He still listens, perhaps more deeply than ever before. But he no longer plays his part in the script. He no longer offers the expected line. This subtle shift, this refusal to perform, creates a distance all its own. From the outside, he may appear almost the same. He shows up to the events. He is polite. He has not vanished from the face of the earth. But something fundamental has recalibrated within him, and the people around him can feel the tectonic shift, even if they cannot name it. They sense that he is no longer trying to impress them, that he is not looking for their approval, that he has, for reasons they cannot fathom, stopped playing the social game entirely. Some will find this admirable, a quiet strength they wish they had. Others will find it deeply unsettling. He has become difficult to read, an uninterpretable signal. He doesn't flatter to gain favor. He doesn't compete for dominance. He doesn't entertain to earn his place. This makes him an anomaly, hard to categorize, and therefore hard to trust. They might say he has become distant, or too quiet, or that he has changed. What they truly mean is that he no longer fits neatly into the role they had assigned him. They preferred him when his reflection confirmed their own values. Now, he reflects something else entirely, something self-contained, something grounded in a soil that does not require their watering. People look at him, but they do not see him. To truly see him now would require them to look at the world through his eyes, to see the illusions he sees. And most people have built their lives inside those illusions. They are not ready to watch the walls come down. There was a time when he believed that connection was synonymous with constant involvement, that to be a good friend, a good partner, a good man meant showing up, participating enthusiastically, and maintaining the appearance of being in sync with everyone. But as his priorities turned inward, that definition began to crumble. He stopped engaging out of a sense of obligation, not because he cared for others less, but because he no longer needed them to affirm that he was worthy of care. He still values genuine connection, but he can no longer confuse it with the relentless performance of engagement, the emotional theatrics, or the subtle, exhausting negotiations for approval. His withdrawal is not an act of resentment. It is an act of discernment. He simply finds no value in maintaining relationships that are built upon a foundation of pretense and unspoken expectation. To those who are accustomed to a more transactional form of connection, I give you this, so you give me that. His presence will feel distant, even cold. But in reality, he is just no longer on the same exchange floor. He no longer speaks merely to keep the peace, because he has discovered that such peace is only a temporary truce. He no longer sees himself through the lens of other people's perceptions. And in the spaciousness that this realization creates, a profound clarity emerges. This is not loneliness. It is a calm, unshakable independence that allows him to remain rooted while the lives of others swirl and change around him. He has chosen honesty, and from that choice, a deeper, more resilient freedom begins to take shape. From the outside, solitude is almost always misunderstood. In a culture that equates being alone with being lonely, a man by himself is often seen as a man lacking friends, lacking purpose, lacking the essential ingredient of belonging. But for the man who has begun to see clearly, solitude is transformed. It is no longer a punishment, it becomes a sanctuary. He no longer fills his hours with distractions simply to avoid being alone with himself. He no longer seeks out constant company as an escape from his own discomfort. He has learned the profound art of sitting in silence without needing it to end. What others might describe as a lonely void, he recognizes as an unfamiliar and perhaps unsettling stillness. They mistake the absence of noise for the presence of emptiness. He has realized that a great deal of what fills an ordinary day The conversations, the tasks, the duties, is merely noise masquerading as importance. In solitude, he meets himself without distortion. There is no audience to perform for, no image to uphold. This self-confrontation can be uncomfortable at first, like stepping into a bright light after a lifetime in dim rooms. But that discomfort is the price of clarity, and that clarity, once earned, becomes his greatest source of strength. He does not avoid people, but he has severed the invisible cord of dependency that once tied his sense of completeness to their presence. This inner shift is often confusing to those on the outside. They assume he must be depressed, disconnected, or worse, arrogant. But the truth is far simpler. He has become content with his own presence. He has turned to face the silence that most people spend their lives running from, and he has made a startling discovery. It wasn't a terrifying silence at all. It was a profound and lasting peace. As he grows more stable within himself, he becomes less predictable to others. This is not a strategic choice. It is the natural consequence of no longer participating in the subtle, unspoken exchanges that form the bedrock of most social interaction. He does not mirror back their emotions to make them feel validated. He does not offer reassuring platitudes when it would require him to deny what he genuinely sees and feels. For those who are still deeply reliant on external validation, this behavioral shift creates unease. They may misinterpret his calm neutrality as arrogance, his thoughtful silence as judgment, his healthy detachment as disinterest. In reality, he is none of these things. He is simply no longer invested in the exhausting business of managing perceptions. So much of what we proudly call connection is, in fact, a highly skilled performance. It is a mutual, unconscious agreement to keep certain comforting illusions perfectly intact. The moment he steps outside of this arrangement, his mere presence becomes a disruption. He doesn't need to argue, to provoke, or to preach his perspective. The simple absence of the familiar social signals, the eager approval, the strategic flattery, the emotional reinforcement, is enough to make the entire system feel unstable. Many of his old friendships will begin to fade, not in a dramatic blaze of conflict, but in the quiet, gray ash of irrelevance. The foundation upon which they were built can no longer support the weight of his new awareness. He begins to see how many relationships are maintained through a shared diet of complaints, through mindless routine, or through the mutual reinforcement of carefully crafted personal stories. Once he stops participating in these patterns, the connection, which was dependent on them, simply withers. He no longer feels compelled to offer agreement just to feel a sense of belonging. He no longer has the patience for conversations that meticulously avoid anything of substance. And he has absolutely no interest in maintaining ties that require him to make himself smaller, quieter, or less authentic. This entire transformation is not a rejection of other people. It is the natural outcome of a change in where he is willing to invest his precious energy. In this new landscape, the very definition of friendship changes. It becomes something quieter, simpler, and infinitely more rare. It is no longer based on a shared set of illusions, but on a spark of mutual recognition. It is the meeting of two people who do not need each other to feel complete, yet who consciously choose to walk alongside one another without placing demands or expectations on the journey. These kinds of connections cannot be manufactured or forced. They emerge naturally, if they emerge at all, and only when both individuals have stopped seeking their other half and have instead embraced their own wholeness. The vast majority of our social world operates on a set of unspoken rules. You validate my perspective, and I will validate yours. We will not venture into the deep, unsettling waters. We will not seriously challenge each other's most cherished assumptions. We will pretend to agree, even when a quiet part of us knows we do not. For most of his life, he played by these rules. It was the price of admission to the tribe. But once he begins to operate outside of them, the entire social dynamic begins to break down in his presence. He no longer offers comforting words just to smooth over tension. He does not pretend to agree when he does not. He is finished with the small, daily acts of self-betrayal that make everyone else feel secure, but leave him feeling false. This is not an act of defiance. It is a state of clarity. And that very clarity is disruptive, because it shines a light on how much of our daily life is structured around a mutual, silent agreement to avoid certain truths. People notice. They may not understand what has changed, but they feel the shift in the atmosphere. They sense that a familiar comfort has gone missing, the constant, low-grade exchange of validation, distraction, and reassurance. And without him contributing his energy to feed its system, the system itself grows weaker around him. Conversations start to feel strained and awkward. Invitations slowly dry up. What once felt warm and familiar now feels tense and unfamiliar. It is not because he has done anything wrong. It is because he has stopped playing his part. He hasn't rejected anyone. He has simply stopped reinforcing a social structure in which he no longer has any faith. As his understanding matures, something unexpected and liberating occurs. He begins to need less. Not only in a material sense, but emotionally, socially, and intellectually. He no longer seeks recognition. He no longer depends on others to confirm truths he has already discovered within himself. And as this deep, existential need dissolves, many of the relationships that were built upon its fulfillment naturally dissolve along with it. This is the great paradox of the awakening journey. The clearer he becomes, the quieter his external life becomes. This is not because he is closing himself off from the world, but because so much of what once filled his time and energy was fundamentally rooted in a search for external affirmation. Once that search ends, a great deal of social activity is revealed for what it is, optional, and often unnecessary. He stops trying so hard to be understood. He releases the need to explain himself. He no longer measures his worth or his presence by how much space he occupies in the minds and lives of other people. From an external viewpoint, this can look like a retreat, a withdrawal from life. But from the inside, it feels like the exact opposite. It is a settling, a grounding, a homecoming to something solid and authentic that was always there beneath the noise. He has not become cold or heartless. He has become independent. And within that conscious detachment, he discovers a depth of being that can never be found through the frantic efforts of attachment. Once a man wakes up, he cannot unsee what he has seen. When he looks inward, the internal noise settles into a quiet hum. When he looks outward, he sees a world that is, for the most part, still asleep. He sees the false certainty in people's eyes, the well-rehearsed roles they are performing, the beliefs they hold but have never questioned the constant, busy movement that serves mostly to mask an inner stillness they are afraid to touch. He no longer feels envy for what others call connection, because he understands the hidden cost. That kind of connection often demands agreement, performance, and conformity. And he is no longer willing to trade his hard-won truth for the fleeting comfort of fitting in. And yet, a part of him remembers. A part of him quietly, gently hopes. Not for crowds or for constant company, but for a different kind of meeting. For someone else who is also awake. Someone who has seen what he has seen, felt the tectonic shifts he has felt. Someone who does not need him to be smaller, quieter, or more agreeable in order to feel safe. That kind of encounter is rare. It cannot be planned or forced. And he has reached a point where he would infinitely prefer to wait in silence than to engage in the hollow pretense of conversation. So he walks alone, not because he takes pleasure in separation, but because he has realized that in a world that is still largely dreaming, authenticity is a more valuable currency than acceptance. There comes a point where the solitude ceases to feel strange or unusual. It simply becomes normal. Not empty, but quiet. He no longer sees distance as a problem to be solved, but as the natural, organic result of no longer pretending. While others feverishly surround themselves with noise and activity, he has learned to inhabit a deep, personal stillness. While many chase attention and recognition, he moves through the world without asking to be seen. People will often project their own fears onto him, assuming he must be lonely. They operate on the belief that any company is better than no company at all. But this is a fundamental confusion of isolation with absence. He is not absent. He is profoundly present. He is simply no longer performing. He has grown to prefer the clear, clean space that honesty creates over the claustrophobic closeness that illusion demands. This is the final, most significant shift. He no longer needs the world to wake up in order for him to feel whole. He no longer requires agreement from others to feel clear in his own mind. And he no longer needs validation to know, in his bones, who and what he is. He walks alone, it is true. But he does not walk as an outsider, an exile, or a stranger. He walks as a man who has made peace with the necessary cost of living in truth.